Good evening, everyone. It's lovely to have you here with us today. And we're delighted to welcome you to this webinar on Jewish Art, Preservation, and Perseverance. The Center for Jewish Art races to digitize historical Jewish life. We are here this evening with Anna Berezin and Vladimir Levine, who are Vladimir is the director of the Center for Jewish Art at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and Anna also works at the center. And I think that we are in for an incredible evening, and I'd like to get it started. We were going to have a wonderful introduction by one of our good friends, Betsy Gidwitz. Unfortunately, we've had a little bit of a computer glitch, so we will ask her to join us later on and say a few words. So, Anna, the floor is yours. Please get us started.
So then we'll meanwhile introduce ourselves and every time we deliver a lecture on the Center for Jewish Art, we start with this image, as this is the portrait of Professor Bezalel Narkis, who established our center in 1979 as a research institute at the Hebrew U. And not only that, he was actually among these key people that shaped Jewish art as an academic field. And his dream, his vision was the Index of Jewish Art, this research tool that will unite Jewish objects from all over the globe and allow research of iconography and comparison between regions and on timeline. And here today in 2020, we have this Index of Jewish Art named after Professor Bezalel Narkis. And this is the co-project of the center. And all other projects are united around the index. And before we speak about the results of our research and documentation that is all in the index, uploaded, accessible to all researchers and lay people, let's define for us our field, the Jewish art. As probably today, I believe, Jewish art sounds as good, as respectable as Jewish history or Bible studies. But it was not always that way. In the 19th century, let's say, then Jewish studies or art history were emerging as academic fields. Scholars saw Jewish culture as a culture of text, and visual aspects, if any, came to the scholarly attention, then they were treated as not authentic, not original, imitative in its nature. And not to say that the second commandment that time was seen as this major restriction to the development of Jewish creativity. And this actually was the consensus for some 100 years and even more. And it took quite a while to accumulate a number of findings of Jewish objects that changed the picture. What kind of objects do I mean? For example, Hebrew illuminated manuscripts. That was a discovery. And archaeological digs made great change. For example, this Beit Alpha synagogue, excavated in 1928, I bet everyone visited it during their trips to Israel and saw this mosaic floor and one of its panels depicting the binding of Isaac. And even more important discovery the synagogue in the Hellenistic town Duroiropos, so from the 3rd century. And then you see this synagogue extensively covered with wall paintings depicting Bible scenes and featuring human figures. These kind of findings make you very Jewish culture and the Jewish culture. But how would you define it? And then there is no clear answer up until today. And every research institution defines Jewish art, its field, differently. And that's why before we present our results and our research and our approach, we should speak about definition of Jewish art as we see it. And here are some outlines, some ways to define it. So the Center for Jewish Art see every object created for Jewish use as an object that belongs to the corpus of Jewish material culture. Which means that if a synagogue was built by a non-Jewish architect, we still see that as a Jewish object. But if a Jewish artist created some decoration for a church, which is a seldom case, but it existed, then the fruit of his work we don't define as Jewish art. And then we speak about modern art, then the baseline is subject. If a Jewish artist reflects upon Jewish topics, then, as Dr. Levin likes to put it, so Chagall is in and Modigliani is out. And this is our way to define our field. And our research is an implementation of this approach. And I hope that Vladimir will show you how we do this. So Vladimir, the floor is yours, unless Betsy would like to add something or to introduce us now.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. Do we have Betsy now? Francine?
No, unfortunately, we don't have Betsy. We had a computer glitch from our end. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, yes.
And we are waiting for poor Betsy. She was here, and she's been trying to get on. And as soon as we have Betsy, she will deliver remarks.
Okay, great. So, meantime, I will continue. Good evening or good morning to everybody. And I saw we list a lot of familiar names, so good part of the day to everybody who knows us, and also for those new people who came to listen about that. So, I hope that you see my screen. And what I will try to show you is the work of the Center for Jewish Art in the last 40 years, just to give you a little bit to taste what we are doing. And our work, of course, started with a Hebrew illuminated manuscript, and Professor Narkis was the world-renowned specialist on Hebrew illuminated manuscripts, and therefore this was the first field of in which the Center for Jewish Art worked. And of course, what Professor Narkis looked in the manuscripts, it was Jewish iconography. So what you depict and how you depict some scenes or symbols or other things. And of course, we have manuscripts produced in Islamic countries, like this one, this Bible from Cairo, where you usually don't put images of people, and you have manuscripts from a Christian world where you can have depictions of people as well. Starting to work with manuscripts, Professor Narkis understood very fast that the iconography is not only in the manuscript but in other objects as well, and therefore established a section for ancient Jewish art, where the researchers also dealt with iconography. Iconography found in public buildings like this synagogue in Susia, for instance, a mosaic, or iconography found in private objects like this lamp with a menorah. I hope you can see it as well. It's not simply menorah, it's menorah with sanctuary implements here on the sides. So it has basically the same meaning like the menorah in. Besides the ancient art, Bezalel Narkis also brought the center to research sacred and ritual objects, which were used by Jews, of course. The majority of those objects are of relatively modern origin, but we work on objects, again, objects found in the synagogues and objects found in private houses. And I think that some of you, many of you saw in the invitation to this webinar, saw this strange object. We have documented it in the town of Bitola in Macedonia. Today it's called North Macedonia. And for a long time we couldn't understand what is it. What is this box which shaped as a hand in the priestly blessing with dedicated inscription? We understand the year. We couldn't understand what these objects can be used for, until we found a similar object in collection of one of the museums in St. Petersburg, where it's really clear what is it. It's a Torah finial. So we didn't know what is it. And Bitola, the museum in Bitola, which had this object, they didn't know what is it. The museum in St. Petersburg understood what is it, but they didn't know where it came from. So our index and our documentation allows to put all these things together. So today we know that the object in St. Petersburg comes from also from Bitola, from the Aragon synagogue. It says the inscription, and the object which we documented in Bitola, it comes from the Portugal synagogue in the same town. So it's old Sephardi synagogues in the Balkans, which reflect the origin of the Sephardi people who came there and settled. What else? Recently we started to document also ritual objects which are produced by the students or former students and teachers or former teachers in the Bezalel Academy of Art. So in this, among those objects, we can find very traditional objects, again, Torah finials, for instance, or the objects which are completely new, like this set for Havdalah. You don't have many, usually you don't have sets for Havdalah in the 19th century, in the 18th century, but it's a modern object, or plate for Tu B'Shvat. In the 19th century, nobody celebrated Tu B'Shvat. Today, it's an important Israeli holiday, and so modern artists create objects for this celebration. And if we speak about these objects, these works by Bezalel artists, modern Bezalel artists, they combine to our section, the section for ritual objects and the section for modern art. And as Anna has already said, we are interested in modern art, but we have a problem with definition. So we define the artifacts that we are interested in as produced by Jewish artists and having Jewish topics, Jewish iconographical topics, which can connect those things with old Jewish traditions existing from the ancient times. So these were the section of the center which Bezalel Narkis created, and in the 70s, in the early 80s, and those this was how the Index for, Center for Jewish Art worked for years. In the 90s, when the, Professor Aliza Cohen-Muslin became the director of the center, she created a new section which started to deal with Jewish architecture. The creation of this section, it was a development caused by geopolitics. The communist bloc disappeared, the the curtain disappeared. It was possible to travel to Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union, and there were a lot of synagogues in different states of preservance. So the Center for Jewish Art started to document them. And the most important, what we do with buildings, we document, we measure them, and we produce measured drawings, which allow us to understand the building and to preserve them for the future researchers. But we not only deal with synagogues, we're also interested in other specific Jewish buildings like mikvaot or cemetery chapels, for instance. And even in Jewish homes, when these Jewish homes are different from the homes of the local, for instance, Jewish houses, a large room in Jewish houses in Uzbekistan were used for prayer, and they have Hebrew inscriptions. Or many of you probably have heard about houses with built-in sukkah. So these are buildings, what we are interested in, what we are documenting. And here we have very clear approach. We believe that it's impossible to preserve every Jewish building in the world physically, and that there is no need to do it also. But what we can do and we must do is to document all those buildings, in other words, to preserve them virtually through scientific documentation. That means to produce measured drawings, photographing detailed descriptions, which could be used by the researchers in the future, and which preserve the memory of those buildings even when they disappear. Together with the section for Jewish architecture, we started to work also on Jewish tombstones, because Jewish tombstones in Eastern Europe are amazing works of art, of folk art. And you can see here two examples of such carved tombstone, 18th century tombstones from Ukraine. And for our friends who joined us from Great Britain, if you look here, well, you can see is a lion and unicorn fighting. If you thought that a lion and unicorn are parts of British heraldry, it's not. It's also part of the Jewish iconography, and probably they signify the have a messianic message, that it's Messiah, son of Joseph, fighting with Messiah, son of David. It's one of the. And finally, recently in the last years, we created also a section which deals with Jewish printed books. I understand well that Bezalel Narkis didn't establish this section because he was a researcher of manuscript, and for him, Jewish books were not as old and not as interesting as manuscripts. But today we see that the Jewish books are a very important source for Jewish iconography. And I will start with a late development. For instance, this title page of famous Babylonian Talmud printed in Vilna. You see, it even has a signature of a painter who did it. It's Moshe Maimon, one of several Jewish painters, Jewish artists that worked in 19th century Russia. So it's already, it's a part of the modern Jewish art also. But more traditional books, they have more traditional iconography, and this iconography was widespread because majority of Jews had seen those books. And when Jewish masters needed resources for their work, the first and most obvious source was the book. For example, if you look here on this book published in Sulzbach in 18th century, you have Moses and Aaron standing. It's very typical. It's very typical composition. Moses and Aaron standing flanking something. So look at this Torah shield made in Breslau, not very far from Sulzbach, where we have Moses almost dressed almost the same like here, and Aaron very simple, similar to this Aaron. So probably the master who did this Torah shield, he looked in this book or in many other books with similar depictions, and from them he could organize his composition here on the Torah shield. Or another example, it's connection between books and tombstones. For instance, when you have a tombstone of Tzvi, that means Hirsch, that means deer, and he is a Levi, so you want to show deer and the symbol of Levites, so deer with a jar pouring water on the hands of the Kohanim. How you know how to depict deer holding a jar? So you go to the book and you look and you find kind of depiction which helps you to make your own work. Here it's printed and here it's on stone. Also, what we many researchers now, it's a very modern trend in research. They look at Jewish books and to illustrations in Jewish books. We also look at them not only on the title pages but also inside, where you can find sometimes find amazing things. Samson killing a lion, and such lions will appear later on Jewish tombstones. Or if you were interested all your life how Alexander the Great looked like, you can learn it from this book, from the book of Josephon. This is the Jewish historical book which presents the Jewish history from the beginning of the world till the early Middle Ages. So all of these sections of the Center for Jewish Art, they document those kinds of objects, and what we are first interested in is the Jewish iconography. And this is an example how one iconographical subject, the sacrifice of Isaac, could be found everywhere, starting from Dura Europos Synagogue and Beit Alpha Synagogue, that Anna has shown. It appears in manuscripts, in ritual objects, in tombstones, in modern art, and usually I show a much more detailed picture with some 30 small pictures, but you cannot see anything in the screen, so I took just several examples to demonstrate you how it works, the search for Jewish iconographical objects. And all the objects, and all the objects that we document, now they appear in the index, Bezalel Narkis Index of Jewish Art. This is today the largest database on Jewish art, and it is different from any other databases on Jewish art because it has this thing, iconographical subject. You can browse or search according to iconographical subject. But it's not all. Today we see the index of Jewish art like this double-headed eagle from one of the Hebrew manuscripts. It's not only iconographical index of Jewish visual culture, it's also a repository of documentation of images of Jewish material culture in general. Because not every building and not every tombstone has something depicted on it, and it does serve research of Jewish iconography, but it is part of the same Jewish material world, the world in which Jews lived, and world of objects which Jews created or used them for themselves. And therefore, we see the index today as a double-headed eagle with two of these goals. And currently, here you have some statistics about the index. What is important, I think, is that currently there are about 326,000 of images in the index. It's open to all, and everybody can use it and find there, and hopefully also find he is looking for. The documentation of objects which we make, it's not documentation for itself, for its person. It's documentation which is the first stage of any research. You cannot do a research without collecting primary materials. And we try to collect them, and of course we are not able to make research on every topics which appears in our index, on every objects which we have documented somewhere. But we believe that the documentation is a kind of virtual preservation of objects, and the future generation of researchers and students and interested people will find it very useful for their own tasks. And how we do the documentation, we send research expeditions, and this is a map which shows countries where we have documented in the last 40 years. So basically it's all European countries plus Arabic countries where Israelis can enter, like Egypt, and the team of the Center for Jewish Art was in Egypt in 1983, immediately after the peace agreement between Israel and Egypt. And our teams also traveled to Tunisia and to Morocco. And we worked in other Muslim countries which are accessible for Israelis, like Turkey, or Azerbaijan, or Uzbekistan. And our team also worked in India. And later I will show you what we would like to do more in Europe and outside of Europe. So we collect material, but some of this material serves us for the research, and such researchers we publish. And there are two examples, our two latest publications. One is about synagogues in Lithuania. Another one is about synagogues in Volhynia, that is one of the regions in Ukraine. And now we prepare two other books. One is on the synagogues in Latvia, and another one is on Jewish history and heritage in Siberia, and it will be the first publication in the English language about Siberian Jews. But what I would like to show you, it's another book, which will be printed in the next week. This is a book by Professor Aliza Cohen-Mushlin on Hebrew manuscripts in the Bavarian State Library in Munich. So this book will be published next week and will be available. And just again to give you a kind of taste what is inside, I will show you only one picture. It's an illumination from a Hebrew manuscript of Mishale Kadmoni, it's Book of Fables. It shows us an adulterous woman which runs away with her lover. And I brought it here just to show that not, when we think about Jewish art, we usually think about art connected to religion. The art which images which represent religious topic and have religious meanings, but we cannot forget, we should not forget that there are Jewish art is much broader than narrow religious realm. It speaks also about other topics in. So this was about the books, But some of our research is not published as a book, but presented as online catalogs, again available to all. And this is, for example, the catalog of wall paintings in Central and Eastern European synagogues, the project which was led by Boris Haimovich. So in the framework of this project, we tried to collect all murals, all wall paintings in European synagogues having some iconographical subject, not clearly decorative images, only images with some meaning. And we collected them both in the synagogues that are still standing and were documented by us, and also in the synagogues which were destroyed, but fortunately were photographed before descriptions, before the destruction, and even we include in the index those synagogues that we have no images from them, but we have written sources. So if some memoir book says, and in our synagogue there was zodiac sign on the ceiling, we also included this synagogue in the catalog of wall paintings. Please, you can use this catalog as well. It's available online to everybody. And like with the book of Aliza Cohen, I would like to show you also some pictures from this catalog. For example, this is an 18th century wooden synagogue in Yaroshev, today it's Ukraine. The synagogue was burned during World War II. What we see here, it's a messianic, it's an expression of messianic hopes. Look, here you have a depiction of Psalm 137. On the rivers of Babylon, we were sitting and we put our musical instruments on the trees because we are in Galut. We are outside of the land of Israel. But what is here in the left side? Yeah, if you cross a river, and this is a river, if you cross a river from a bridge, you find a strange Baroque building with the most important element here is a huge lock. So it's a locked building. And in front of the building, there is a horse which waits for somebody. And what it could be? Oh, probably this building meant to be the third temple, future temple, which will appear in the Messianic times. Or we can read it also as a palace in the heaven where Messiah is waiting for his time to come. So probably, and the horse, of course, is waiting for the Messiah, but it's not a white horse. It's like some different kind of a horse. So it's a complicated picture which presents and expresses the messianic hopes of the Jewish people. But there are also more simple depictions on the walls of European synagogues. And must say that probably the majority of East European synagogues, at least large synagogues, they were painted one way or another, and only a small part of them is preserved or at least documented somehow. And the synagogues had a lot of different images inside, and we're not going to speak about big images, but about those small images, which represent the zodiac signs. And why zodiac appears in the synagogue? Yeah, it represents the universe. It's a return of the time. It's a circle of time, in the universe. And it's one of the oldest topics, of the oldest subjects in Jewish iconography. We saw in Beit Alpha, and let's see, for example, a presentation of Gemini, twins, zodiac sign of Gemini. In Beit Alpha, they're represented as two children, twins, yeah, even with 4 legs, somehow connected to the bodies. In the 19th century, we also can find the paintings which show twins as human beings in the synagogues, for instance, in Krakow, in two synagogues in Krakow. But in other synagogues, people didn't want to show, to depict human bodies. So they looked for other ways. Twins, so you need a couple of something. So for instance, here you have a couple of trees, and here you have a couple of deer to represent the sign of Gemini. But the most popular form of representation was with birds, different kind of birds, or storks here in Botoshan, or hens, or birds sitting on trees. So you have two birds and two trees. It works together very well. And all this you can find in our catalog. And what we would like to do in the future is to extend our catalog to the New World, to the United States and other countries in the Americas, because there we also find the continuation of the same East European tradition in the synagogues of immigrants. And probably they were the same artist who worked in New York in this Bialystoker synagogue, but probably he learned in Eastern Europe before his immigration. And the scheme by iconography and the idea of the paintings is the same, so we wish we could continue with this project in the United States. And another project that I would like to show you is the project which we work now on it. It's a catalog of illuminated Esther scrolls. The project is led by Dr. Dagmar Abudzioch, and we hope to finish it into the first part of it, largest part of it, the next year. Scrolls of Esther are amazing things, those which are illuminated. For instance, this scroll made in Amsterdam in the 17th century, it's a low-cost scroll. So the imagery is engraved, and the text was written by hand later. This scroll, which comes from the collection of Bill Gross in Tel Aviv, and Bill Gross is one of the oldest friends of the Center for Jewish Art and one of the greatest collectors of Jewish objects in the world. So this 18th century scroll from Alsace, it has a lot of images inside of it, and for instance, there is a zodiac again, and here Gemini are depicted as human beings and human children. And pay attention that this guy, dressed as an 18th century guy, points to the zodiac sign of fish, the zodiac sign of the month of Adar and Purim. If we look at another page of there is no page, of course, in scrolls. In another place of this scroll, we will suddenly find 5 naked women. Today, no Orthodox Jew will understand what these 5 naked women do in the Esther scrolls, but we can say that probably they represent Jewish girls oppressed by Vashti. If you remember in the text, there is Vashti, the first wife of King Ahasuerus, and he ordered her to appear naked at his feast, and she refused, and therefore he took him another wife, Esther. And today Vashti is a feminist symbol, but the Talmudic sages, they didn't like her and described her as a very bad person, and among her other sins, he was forcing Jewish girls to work on Saturdays naked. And probably these 5 girls depicted here illustrate the midrash about these naked Jewish girls who were forced to work on Saturday. And the same scroll also can bring us back to speak about architecture. You see people, Jews going to pray in the synagogue. And we understand that it's synagogue because it has external women's section that is characteristic for European synagogues of the Middle Ages. And probably in the 19th century, somebody put here Magen David, the Jewish star, when it became fashionable that synagogues are decorated with the Star of David. And this brings us to another project which we made, and I will finish with this one. This is a project on historic synagogues of Europe, where we found information and placed on the map all existing historic synagogues existing in Europe, and we also evaluated them about the significance and the condition of building fabric, so that it's possible to understand which synagogues should be preserved the first. And what I must say, after dealing with this project of historic synagogues of Europe, in Europe, the situation with the Jewish built heritage has significantly improved during the last 20 years. And Jewish heritage is in the center of the public discourse. But the problem now we see, the problem is in the USA, in Canada, in Argentina, in the other South American countries, and in South Africa, where communities are moving from one place to another. They abandon their synagogues and sell them, and those buildings mostly disappear without traces, and we would like to document them before they disappear. And there are several private projects. For example, for Canada, we work, there is a wonderful woman who worked on documenting synagogues in Canada, and now her collection is going to be uploaded in the Index of Jewish Art. There is another research in Brasilia who helps us with this, but we would like to go there. And if you can see here on this map, this is the areas where now we would like to start documenting before it is not too late and before things did not disappear completely. So this is all, and thank you very much for participating in our webinar. And if you are interested, you can go to the Index of Jewish Art. Here is the address, or you can Google it. And if you would like to be on our mailing list, please write to us to our email or follow us on Facebook. And thank you very much for coming and for listening.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Vladimir and Anna. We do have a few questions, and I will read them to you, or you can go into the Q&A and answer them live. Can you
read them, please?
Okay. Meir Bulka says that you, Vladimir, said about the synagogues that, quote, there is no need to save them anymore. And he asks why.
No, what I said is that not all the synagogues, all 1,000 synagogues should be preserved or saved. Because we understand that communities are also living creatures, living organizations which have their own needs, and they move from one place to another. So not every building, every Jewish building should be preserved, because it will never serve as synagogue again in some small places in Siberia or in Romania or whatever, where there is no Jews and there is no use for this building. It could be used by local community, non-Jewish communities, and it's very good. But what is important for us is to document them before they disappear. And there are other bodies in the world which deal with preservation of buildings. And of course, preservation of buildings is very costly enterprise. And we think that we should start. The documentation is very important, and the documentation is also the first stage of the preservation. If somebody wants to preserve, I'm not against preservation, but I think the documentation is more important.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We have another question. Oh,
May I just add something? That it's not only that we are not against preservation, by no way. Our documentation in many cases serves those communities and those initiatives that would like to reconstruct or in any way to present their synagogues or preserve their synagogues. So there are many cases we are cooperating with all kinds of bodies, presenting, providing our documentation to them.
Yeah, just today I got a letter from a rabbi in the city of Tomsk, it's in Siberia, who said, we found money, there are two synagogues, one is a wooden synagogue, very interesting building. He writes me, we found money to reconstruct it, to restore it. Please help us with your research, with your materials, with your documentation, which we did 5 years ago in Siberia, where we documented other synagogues and this building also.
okay. We have several questions that are dealing with the issue of digitization. One is asking, what is the biggest issue concerning digitization of materials? And another asks if the center uses 3D digitization methods.
No, we don't use, meantime, we don't use 3D digitization. Maybe we will arrive to it one day. Or with technology, it's very hard to catch with technology. It develops so fast, but we are feeling that all the time that we are not as fast as with technology. And yeah,
but 3D models, we do
3D models, yeah. Once we did 3D models, it's not. I'm not sure that 3D computer models work for 3D digitization, but once we did it, it was very interesting. But when we understood that there are other institutions that do it with better technology than us, and that we can concentrate on research more. And the biggest issue with digitization is to get to the objects themselves, so that to arrive to be able to photograph it and to describe it and to measure it. So this is the biggest issue.
Okay, thank you. We have another question asking if the center researches the ownership history of movable objects.
It's not our specialty. We don't work on it specially, but of course, when we research a manuscript, for example, the history of ownership is part of the history of manuscript that we are interested in, but not the provenance research, which is so important today for different objects. We are not specializing.
Okay. And there is a question about documenting the synagogues in Kochi, India.
Yeah.
Is this something that you've done?
Yes, we documented them in the 90s before they were restored. Some of them were restored by the local authorities and some of them disappeared. And one of those synagogues which we documented was last year struck by a storm, a terrible storm, and it's half destroyed, as I learned recently.
Okay, one last quick comment. Vladimir, we've been asked for you to stop sharing the screen so that you can be seen full screen by our participants.
Excuse me again, excuse me?
Unshare your screen, please.
Okay.
So that we see you.
Okay, yeah.
Lovely, thank you so much. We have a lot of questions here. One is, what is your opinion about the most recent restoration projects of former synagogues in Europe? And does the boom of EU funds help or harm in this case?
The boom of EU funds helps a lot. and it's very important. It's one of the it's one of the very important actors in the recent trend to preserve synagogues, because the local communities, Jewish and non-Jewish, but it's important that the local people start to understand that the synagogue building is not part of their culture, of those Jews who are not here anymore, they're in Israel or in the States or somewhere else, but they understand that this is part of their own heritage, of the local heritage, and part of the cityscape, and they start to be interested in preservation. So here EU funds helps very much. There are very successful projects and very interesting projects, for instance, which preserve the destroyed synagogue as a ruin. For instance, what's its name in a small Polish city? The name escaped, sorry. So you preserve it as a ruin, so you don't destroy, you don't change what has remained, because the destruction is basically also part of the history, and we cannot eliminate it simply by building it anew. And there are bad examples as well, which we know, especially in Ukraine, they are done without EU funds and without some professional advice. And at least I have a lot of, I don't want to say which synagogues are banned. I have a lot of critique about how it was made, but at least those synagogues were saved and they didn't collapse because they were on the in condition of almost immediate collapse. And then local people intervened and they saved it as they could and as they understand.
Thank you. And I think that we're going to close with one, not a question, but a comment to let you know how far-reaching these webinars can be. This is from Ibrahim Shafie. Thank you for your efforts in the Center for Jewish Art. I think this kind of documentation also gives the possibility and opportunity for those who cannot have direct access to these treasures. This is Ibrahim from Iran writing in.
Oh, very nice. Ibrahim, thank you very much.
And we thank you, Ibrahim, for joining us tonight. It's very meaningful to us to know how far-reaching our work is at the Center for Jewish Art and at the Hebrew University. And I encourage Vladimir and Anna to read the chat section. There is a lot of fan mail there and a lot of requests for bibliographies and in additional information about the Center for Jewish Art. Perhaps, Vladimir, you can share that slide one more time with the address of the center. So if anybody is interested in contacting you for more information, there you have the address of the Center for Jewish Art, as well as the homepage and the Facebook address. And I want to thank Vladimir and Anna and apologize to and on behalf of Betsy Gidwitz, who due to some technical issues was unable to join us tonight. But thank you all for participating, all 170 of you who logged on. We will be making a video recording link to this webinar available to all of you, and we'll be sending it out soon. Thank you and have a wonderful rest of your day. And it was wonderful listening and seeing such incredible beauty all over the world and revisiting our culture.
Thank you for organizing this event. Francine, thank you very much. And thank you for everybody who came and who listened to us.
Thank you.
And I will read the chat. But there is an option to save the chat, I think.
Yes, I will save the chat and
You know it. Yeah, so you know how to save it. Great. Thank you.
okay. Thank you,
Okay,
everyone.
thank you very much, everybody.
And shalom from Jerusalem.